Today's topic is ChatGPT, artificial intelligence, and the global economic crisis. Hello, everybody. Good to be with you once again. Today, we are very lucky to have with us Professor Prabhu Guptara. He's currently in Cambridge, UK, and he's going to tell us about this. Over to you, Dr. Guptara.
Oh, that's very kind, Subodh. Nice to be here with you, and thank you for the invitation. Well, the topic, of course, is a quite rich one, and we could go on about it for a very long time. But I think we should begin with the fact that we are actually facing not just one economic crisis, but a multiplicity of crises. And these multiplicity of crises are crises that, I'm sorry, this is not moving. This slide, I was going to move it forward and now it won't move. Just one second. We may need to restart it. Sorry. Why is the slide not moving?
The recording
okay.
Okay.
Okay. There was some problem with it.
Okay, fine.
It wasn't moving. Now it should move.
Okay, so please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Subodh, for the invitation. It's great to be here with you. And thank you particularly for the invitation to speak on this topic, which is artificial intelligence, ChatGPT, and the global economic crisis. Now, when we begin to talk about a global economic crisis, we should not forget that actually we are in the middle of several crises. We are in the middle of a climate crisis. We are in the middle of a suicide crisis. We are in the middle of a marriage crisis. We are in the middle of an elder care crisis. We are in the middle of an inequality crisis. We are in the middle of a social welfare crisis. We are in the middle of an inflation crisis, governance crisis, credibility crisis, trust crisis. We can go on and on and on about the number of crises facing us. And one of the issues I want to raise is there something uniting all these, connecting all these? Is there a thread which is actually taking us to the root of the problem? So as we begin to discuss our topic, please, let's just keep that in mind. So let's start with the first point that I want to make, and that is, of these many crises, for us as economists, the most fascinating and longest running crisis is something called the productivity crisis. Now, you would think that most people who haven't yet encountered this phrase productivity crisis must be very strange people living in some remote island, because the productivity crisis has been going on for such a long time.
Okay.
But actually, the productivity crisis is being talked about only by certain economists, not even by all economists.
Right.
And therefore, those economists who are talking about it tend, of course, to be quite familiar with the terminology. They tend to be quite familiar with the history and the facts and figures. But most people, even most economists, are not aware of it. So let's just very quickly recognize that productivity measures the amount of value created for each hour that is worked by any employee.
Yes.
So in other words, if I'm producing lots of books, that's not value.
Right.
The value is only released when I can sell the book to a customer or a set of customers and get the cash for it.
Right.
That's when the productivity cycle is completed.
Right.
And when we understand that, then we begin to understand why it is that greater production since the Second World War has not resulted in increasing productivity. And I'll show you some figures in relation to that.
Okay.
And by the word crisis, we simply mean, crisis is actually, a little exaggerated, people sometimes feel. But if it's been going on for 70 years, then there's something seriously wrong. And how are you to express that, except to say crisis? So that's the reason why the word productivity crisis is used. So let's look at the facts in relation to the what is happening with productivity growth. So here we have some figures in relation to advanced economies, and these, of course, go back to 1981. But we could take a much longer view. We could take a view from 1951. And if we took a view from 1951, we would be able to show that the UK's productivity, in spite of some peaks and troughs, of course, has been around 1%.
The growth rate.
The growth rate in productivity has been around 1%.
Right.
So it started at 1% and it finishes around 1% at 2015.
Yeah.
And there's not been much in terms of historical analysis and historical facts available since then. Canada's started higher. It started at 3%, but it converged with UK by 2015. France started at 4%, so even higher. Italy started at 6%. Germany started at over 8%. Japan just under 10%. So we're talking 1951, right?
Right, I understand.
But you see that the productivity rate is sliding and sliding, and by 2015, it comes down to around 1%. This is why it is called a productivity crisis. Now, you could say that actually there are other factors to consider that we should also keep in mind. There's been a huge transfer of money, wealth, technology, etc., from developed economies to developing economies. So when we look at the productivity in developing economies and we compare it to the productivity in developed economies, you can see in the chart in front of you that the productivity in developed economies is still hugely higher than the productivity in developing economies.
Yes.
And when you go to low-income countries, then it's even lower.
Right.
So this is one kind of factor we've got to take into account, but it's not the only one, of course. But let's very quickly go on because we can have a long discussion about the productivity crisis.
Okay.
But the key issue is there has been a productivity crisis up to the rise of artificial intelligence. Now the question arises, will artificial intelligence actually help us to sort it out? And in order to understand why it will not help us to sort it out, we need to recognize that global value chains are networks of balance sheets across industries. So if I cannot produce my books, because there is only now one company in the world that produces forest-friendly paper, environment-friendly paper, which is true. There's only one company in the world that now produces environment-friendly paper. Then, of course, my capacity to produce books as a publisher, I'm a publisher now, gets hugely reduced. But even if I'm producing a lot of books, in spite of that, my capacity to sell them and my capacity to sell them at a price which makes sense depends on what is happening in a whole lot of other industries. So the productivity crisis cannot be understood by looking at it in a silo kind of way or in a bubble kind of way. You cannot look at one factory, you cannot look at one individual company, you cannot look at one individual worker. You've got to look at the whole system. And you've got to say what across the whole system is enabling productivity to increase or hindering productivity from increasing. And this kind of analysis, of course, becomes very difficult because we are talking about these networks over time. We're talking about these networks across political systems. And we're talking about these networks at different stages of technological maturity, political maturity, economic maturity, customer behavior maturity, and so on. So it becomes very difficult to analyze it and think about it. But what I want to do is to move on beyond that to just asking ourselves, if you just look at production, which is one side of it, that will obviously zoom once artificial intelligence becomes really in place. So here is a chart showing that productivity would go up depending on the sophistication of the artificial intelligence from 0.3% to 2.9%, depending on how powerful the technology is. Now, this analysis was made by Goldman Sachs, one of the biggest companies in the world, most authoritative companies in the world, before ChatGPT hit. Now, suddenly ChatGPT has hit, and we have taken an astronomical leap. What do I mean? Well, there's been a research done at MIT recently, and MIT research showed that actually the productivity of people using ChatGPT, this is of course individuals, goes up by 37%. 37% compared to people, a control group that is not using ChatGPT. Not only that, this is at first use. If you then ask people to repeat tasks, the new tasks that they've done before, then the ability of people who are using ChatGPT to improve their performance goes up faster than the ability of people who are not using ChatGPT. And remember, this is only fourth generation artificial intelligence. We're going to get to fifth generation, sixth generation, seventh generation, and quickly. So we can see that the exponential increase from 0.3 to 2.9%, well, you could call it arithmetical increase to 2.9%, has now suddenly become exponential increase to 37%. And as we go, so with every generation of new technology, with every generation of artificial intelligence coming into implementation, we don't go up arithmetically, we go up incredibly geometrically and much more exponentially.
Right.
So you can see that very, very soon, the production capacity of individuals, as well as the production capacity of factories, is going to become infinite.
Yeah.
So to speak. In other words, we will have no problem with producing any amount of services, any amount of product in any field.
Yeah.
And because we moved into a world of dark factories, where the factories do not need a lot of people, this does not result in the employment of greater and greater numbers of people, unlike what happened with mass manufacturing.
Yes. Agree.
So we will need fewer and fewer people to produce more and more product.
Right.
This is one huge challenge that is posed by this technology. It was kind of being posed already, and it was one of the reasons, of course, why Western economies found themselves with declining middle classes, with all the social, political, and health and so on consequences of those developments. But those are now going to come and affect, of course, also those countries that have built their fortunes on generations of technology by which they were able to mass produce and sell to the West.
Yes.
Because the same problems are going to hit India, China, Vietnam, etc., around the world. So we have the capacity to produce more and more, that's one side, while the capacity to buy is not necessarily going to go up in tandem.
Yeah.
It may, depending on what political and social initiatives are taken, but it may not. And the challenge is, since we're not moving very fast on the social and political front, which enables workers to be trained and those who are made redundant to be somehow paid so that they can continue to be constructive, useful consumers, the challenge is not on the production side. The challenge is on the consumption side. How do we finance the consumption of practically infinite amounts of services and infinite amounts of product being produced? That's one challenge. The second challenge is that the currencies in which we are paying for products and services are actually being deflated. And they have been deflated since about 1970, when the gold standard fell. Now, I'm not buggy, I should make that quite clear. But I am somebody who believes that the value of a currency, a pound or a dollar or a rupee or a yen, whatever it is, should be somewhat in line with the real value of the goods that are being produced in the territory which that currency represents.
Right.
In other words, the dollar should represent, in some real sense, the total amount of GDP being produced in the United States. And what's happened since the 70s is that the value of the dollar has represented less and less of the real value being produced in the United States. This is partly to do with global value chains, and there's a whole debate about how much value is actually being produced in the United States versus China versus India and so on. Yes, but even after all that has been factored in, the fact remains that all our currencies globally, because of quantitative easing and so on, reflect less and less of the real value that they should be representing in terms of payments. Or to put it in a rather stronger terms, we are paying in nominal currencies increasingly rather than real currencies increasingly.
Yeah. Okay.
And so this is a second issue that rises. The third issue that rises with this new technology is that what matters is not the production so much, or the productivity so much, as the issue of who will own these new technologies.
True.
Because as you know, at the time of the gold rush, everybody went out with their spades. So the legend goes, and were digging around for gold. And some people discovered some gold and some people didn't. But the people who actually made a killing out of the gold rush were the people who manufactured spades.
Right. Right.
In the same way, we can go looking for gold, and some of us may hit gold with the new products we have or the new companies we established. Great, wonderful. But the people who will really make the money out of the whole system will be the people who own the technology.
Yeah.
And we live in a world where Wild West type markets, in other words, more and more unregulated markets, which are more and more markets that bias themselves towards the victor in these technology wars, create oligopolies after an initial fizz of lots of companies producing lots of stuff. Consolidation takes place. Some people drop out for good reasons. Some people drop out, companies drop out for bad reasons. But ultimately, oligopolies are produced. And the danger is that monopolies are produced.
Yeah.
So whether it's an oligopoly or whether it's a monopoly, a very small number of people are actually getting the bulk of the benefit from these new technologies.
Yeah.
In other words, the newer and newer the technology, the greater and greater the contribution it makes to wealth concentration.
True.
Rather than wealth diffusion.
Yeah.
It creates loads and loads of opportunity, yes.
Yeah.
Creates loads of opportunity, but the end result of that opportunity being created by lots of companies and lots of technologies is actually wealth consolidation.
Okay.
So as wealth consolidation takes place,
right,
it reduces the capacity of the average customer to buy.
But
And
let
this
me
is
just,
well,
Prabhu, let me stop you for a minute.
please.
I agree that there is wealth consolidation taking place. But if you look back to the times of, say, 200-300 years ago, in countries that had the nobility and the kings, do you think the concentration of wealth was more then, or it's going to be more now?
Well, let's assume for the purpose of argument that wealth concentration then was roughly the same as wealth concentration now, or will be in the future.
Yeah.
We have to reflect on the fact that in those days, the product producers were very few and were very poorly paid.
Yes.
Now we are living in a world where there'll be lots of product being produced.
Yes.
And therefore we need lots of consumers.
Okay, so the problem
and if lots of consumers are not there, the product becomes valueless.
Yeah, so who's going to buy?
If I produce a million books,
if
I produce a million books and nobody buys it, what is the point? My million books are just trash. They're just the equivalent of firewood.
So the inequality creates its own lack of demand.
Inequality creates this lack of demand, and lack of demand means that the production capacity is nullified in terms of the value it can generate.
Okay.
I'm putting the argument in extreme terms. It happens slowly, it happens over time, but you can see the direction of the argument.
Okay, great. All right, let's continue.
So as we continue, let's stop for a moment, if you don't mind, and switch over to my other slides.
Okay, I'll pause it till you do that. We are back on the recording with the new slide. So go ahead, please.
Okay. So I want to now suggest some reasons why we have the interconnected problems, because I've been suggesting the interconnections between them. And I want to look at some of the fundamental reasons why we've got the problems we have. And the first of them, in my view, is that our global and political systems, structures, make unrealistic assumptions. The first of these is that human beings are mainly decision-making units. The second of these is that money is an accurate source of value, which I've already commented on. The third one is that relationships are no more than political or economic connections. And these are, of course, completely false assumptions, because people are more than individuals. Wealth, of course, means much more than money, and society and community are much more than mere connections. So the impact of all this is that we look at the world in a way that is not in line with reality. If relationships are actually the heart of reality, my reality in relation to you, my relationship in relation to the people who are watching this, my relationship to my education and education system, my relationship to the pension system, and so on, then we should be looking at the world relationally and not in the kind of isolated bubbles or silos that we do. And the question to ask ourselves is, how can we see the world through a relational lens? Because if we saw the world through a relational lens, we would have a much greater chance of sorting out the global economic crisis, in my view, than just looking at the production end of it. ChatGPT looks at the production end of it.
Right.
And what I've been trying to suggest by looking at the whole picture is we need to look at things relationally. So we need to view all our endeavors through a lens that is focused on the implications of anything that we do on our relationships. And if we did that, then we would get completely new goals as human beings, as individuals, and as societies, and as nations. We would get new values, and we would get new working practices. So can a focus on something as ordinary as relationships really make such a difference? Well, get relationships right, and the economic, social, and environmental issues are much more likely to sort themselves out. This is basically my argument, and I'll go on to make it. So relational thinking really means that instead of all these things that are on the periphery being their own little kingdoms, which they have to be to a certain extent, we look at them in terms of a common framework, which looks at them not only in themselves, which we need to do, but also in terms of their relationships.
Okay.
So if you want to look at it in terms of the impact of this kind of thinking, I would invite you to consider the work of a man, Michael Schluter, whose work has resulted over 40 years in a whole series of initiatives coming out of his work, which demonstrate over 40 years that this kind of thinking can have real-world impact and does have real-world impact. And I won't go into each of these. I could go into each of these, but obviously you can look each of these up, so I won't bother to do that just now. I just want to move on very quickly to saying that if we did pursue this way of thinking, we would very quickly come to a new way of measuring, influencing, and managing relationships.
Okay.
Both at a system level and at an individual level.
Yeah.
Now, just to give you a very simple illustration, I might say that my relationship with my children is very good.
Yeah.
Or I might say it's not so good. Or I might say it's generally good, but right now it's not so good.
Yeah.
What I'm reporting is my feelings about it.
Yeah.
My son or my daughter or my grandnephew may have a completely different view.
Yes.
But he or she would be equally saying what they feel about it.
Yeah.
Now, the question is, are the feelings valid?
Yeah.
If you say something and I get upset, which could be a very reasonable reaction, am I right in feeling upset?
Yeah, I understand.
And is it something that is taking place just in a moment?
Yeah.
Or does it have an impact on our relationship over a period of time? Because we all say things that upset each other from time to time, right?
Right.
But because we are in a relationship, we explain, we apologize, we make up, right?
Yeah.
And the relationship gets back to normal. So relationships have themselves to be looked at holistically. Is there a way of measuring relationships?
Yeah,
Well,
that's a question.
So Schluter has actually come up with a way of measuring relationships, both in individual terms, in group terms, and in industry terms, company to company, etc.
Yeah.
And it's called the relational proximity framework.
Okay.
This relational proximity framework measures basically 5 things, and you can go into great detail as the image on the left shows, but I just want to talk about the 5 things on the right because those are the basic dimensions that are measured. So beginning at the left and working our way to the right, sequentially, clockwise, the first is touch, which is a short way of saying how much face-to-face time do we have? How much personal or interpersonal contact do we have? If I never see my grandnephew or he or she, grandniece, never sees me, then obviously our face-to-face relationship is going to be rather low. If my chief executive, let's say I'm working for a company, right, has very little contact with the chief executive of the company that buys my product or supplies material for my product, then that is obviously going to mean that this is going to score very low.
Mm-hmm.
The second dimension is how much time do we spend together? You would say it's the same thing. No, it's not the same thing. Because with my eldest son, for example, I have very frequent contact. He rings me every 2 or 3 days. But these are very short conversations.
Right.
So we would score high on touch. We would score low on time.
Right.
This is completely in contrast to my second son,
Mm.
who I don't speak to sometimes for 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But when I speak to him, it is an hour-long, 2-hour, 3-hour-long conversation. He does a complete brain dump of me. We talk about everything in his life.
Right.
So we would score low on touch, but we would score high on time.
Right.
Just to illustrate. The third dimension then is the breadth of the contact. In other words, how much variety of contact. Now, in both the case of my eldest son and my second son, the breadth of contact at the moment is very limited because all the contact takes place by Zoom.
Yeah.
My eldest son lives in America. My second son lives in Switzerland. So obviously, breadth of contact is very narrow.
Yeah.
This is quite different to my daughter who lives in London, who I go and see every 3 weeks or so, 2 or 3 weeks, and I spend several days with them. So the breadth of contact there is much more.
Yeah.
I help to look after the grandchildren. Sometimes I'm helping to warm up food. Sometimes I'm running errands for them, right? We are talking together. We're going out together. We are playing games together. We are joking together, right? So the breadth of contact is much more. And the variety of places in which the contact is taking place is also much more. We go together as guests in people's houses. We are sometimes together hosting people, right? So the breadth of contact, the roles in which you see me are very different. That's the third thing that is measured. The fourth thing that is measured is overlap. Now we're coming to the really serious matters.
Yeah.
How much shared purpose is there?
Right. And that's key, I think.
The reason why most joint ventures in companies break up, the reason why most marriages break up, the reason why most friendships break up is because the shared purpose ceases to exist.
Right. I agree.
So this is a way of measuring how much shared purpose there is. And the fifth thing is balance. Balance means in our relationship, do you treat me as an adult? Do I treat you as an adult? Am I scornful of you? Am I think you are kind of somehow lower than me? Because obviously I'm older, I'm more experienced, right? So I should know more. I may not, but I should know more, right? I should be wiser, right? I may not be, but I should be, right? And in a company, I could be hierarchically more superior to you. I may be earning more money, right?
Yeah.
How do I actually treat you?
Yeah.
Do you as my employee, do you as my niece, do you as my joint venture partner, do you as my professor, or do you as my head of department make me feel that I'm somehow junior to you? Or do you make me feel, yeah, this person's got good ideas, interesting ideas. Not all ideas will be 100% good. Not everything you do will be 100% kosher. Yeah, of course. But basically, you're at the same level as I am. So if that feeling of mutuality is there, that feeling of mutual regard is there, whether you're a company or a group of political parties or 2 sports clubs or whatever you are, then the relationship will be stronger than if you treat me as somebody not at your level.
Yeah.
These are the 5 dimensions that have been found on the basis of research to be the critical dimensions in any relationship, and there is a way of measuring them, and the ingredients that you measure are reflected there on the left.
Yeah, I understand. Right.
Okay. So we've been talking earlier, we mentioned earlier a trust crisis. We mentioned a relationships crisis, elder care, and so on. We mentioned a belonging crisis, families, marriages, breaking down, and so on. So we see on the left of this relational values. What are the values that make for good relationships? And on the right, we see the results of it. The results are relational proximity. If we have the right relational values, then we will find the right relational results.
Yeah.
But the measurement tool cannot measure the relational values. It can only measure the results.
Yeah.
Outcome. Right. But when the outcome isn't quite what you and I want it to be, then we can ask ourselves, why is it that these results are coming out? And we can investigate not just whether we can have more time, directness, more frequency, sorry, directness, more time together continuity, multiplexity, variety of situations in which we know each other, parity, equality, commonality, common shared purpose. Not only
Yeah.
these things, we can also look at the values. So we have shared values.
Yeah.
And where are the differences in our values? And can we come to some discussion of them? Can we come to some convergence of them?
Yeah.
Because that is the root that is driving our behavior, and that is the root that is producing the results that it's producing.
Yeah.
So there is something called relational analytics, and you can look it up and you can go in for measurements.
Yeah.
They allow you to use their technology for personal relationship measurement without any charge. But obviously, if you're a company or a larger organization, a school or a political party or something like
They
that,
will charge
they
you
obviously
for that.
charge to do that because they're helping an entity to, and obviously it requires much greater firepower, so to speak, to enable that to happen. You and I can do something, family can do something just with pencil and paper. This requires huge computer system. You employ 70,000 people or 200,000 people, then obviously it's not something that can be just done like that. But there are technologies and methods available to make that happen. And there's a whole lot of literature around this now. The latest book on this is actually this one. Sorry. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Is corporate capitalism the best we have to offer? And this sums up 40 years of thinking on all this.
Okay.
If you look at this, Schluter is actually suggesting a whole range of issues in terms of monetary reform, how we can get to money, to currencies that actually reflect real value or somewhere near real value, rather than more and more debased currencies that we've had so far.
Okay.
What are the economic policies we need to follow? What are the industrial policies we could follow? What are the commercial policies we could follow? And so on. So this is a systemic approach, not just an approach that is based on individual behavior. But if we were able to implement this kind of thinking and enable relationships to be at the root of things, rather than looking, as we economists do, purely at the economic dimension, then we would come to a way of addressing the whole network of problems that result from looking at things in an isolated and narrow way.
Okay. I get the point that we need to be much more than looking only at standard economic variables. The standard economic.
There's been a great debate about whether GDP is a worthwhile and useful measure. Of course, it's worthwhile and useful in its own way, but whether it should be the determinant of things in terms of national policies and so on, which is a very helpful debate and goes in this direction. But Schluter's point would be, and my point would be, that simply replacing GDP with some kind of happiness index or life quality index or whatever we might call it, prosperity index and so on, is all good stuff. But it still goes only a very small part of the way towards looking at the whole thing in a holistic way. And that's what we need to do if we are going to address the complicated network of problems that we are facing.
You think this will solve the slowdown in productivity? Which is what you pointed to up front, that look, there's a slowdown in productivity growth. Productivity is not declining, it's just growing at a lower pace.
Lower and lower speed and getting closer
so
and
you
closer
think
to
this
zero.
We could check that with this?
Yeah, the reason that it's slowing down, in my view, is because we've been looking at production. Production can be increased by new technologies.
Right.
But the ability of the whole system to realize value from increased production is being inhibited by our systems that look at things in a narrow way and optimize each little bit of it, rather than looking at their relationships, their dependencies, and the system impact of everything that we do. But if we did that, then we would be able to unlock the productivity puzzle. Rather than just the production puzzle. ChatGPT and so on will help us to solve the production puzzle and produce more and more and more and more. But it will not solve the productivity puzzle. And in order to solve the productivity puzzle, we do need to look at things relationally.
All right. I think your point is very clear. Anything else you would like to add?
No. For the moment, that's it in terms of my argument. And of course, the rest is detail. We can go into the detail as much as you like.
I think it's good enough for the moment. Maybe we will ask you back 1 year later whether there's been any progress at all in the way economists look at things? Is this changing? Is it working? And your assessment of what ChatGPT and others like it have actually done, because we
So
just
I would,
not yet
sorry,
there.
yeah, I would just add that there is a lot of literature.
Yeah,
And if you just Google this book, or if you Google any of the other books that came up on the slides earlier,
yeah.
then you will be led into the whole body of literature, the whole body of practice, and the whole kinds of different kinds of initiatives that are being taken. And you will see that this is actually beginning to make an impact, has been making an impact very slowly over 40 years. We now have the first company which practices this kind of behavior, this kind of thinking, implements this kind of thinking, which is now actually quoted on the stock exchange and is worth over $1 billion, actually nearly 1.5 billion as of today. So we are gradually getting there with holistic thinking. And I would just recommend that people, if they're interested, intrigued, follow it up in terms of reading about it.
Can you name any well-known company that is even a little bit into this?
Well known, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I can send you a list of the companies that
No,
are
I'm
that
just
are involved.
curious because people would know from well-known companies. People say, like Southwest Airlines in the US has not laid off any people when there's
Indeed.
a recession. And
Yes.
some of the Japanese car makers also don't lay off people.
Yes.
And they keep the relationships going in a sense.
Yes. So do the German companies. German
How?
companies are outstanding examples of companies that retrain and retrain and retrain
Right.
and keep their workforce and enable them to keep up with technology.
That's a
There
kind
are
of
lots of examples.
relationship, right? That's kind of
Yeah,
relationship lens,
that
right?
is indeed within a company.
Yeah,
And so we will find individuals who practice that,
right.
well-known individuals who practice that. We will find companies that
Yeah.
are reasonably good at practicing that.
Yeah.
But we are not yet at a place where companies representing this kind of thinking beyond themselves are very good, are very well known. And we are certainly not at a place where entire national systems are being affected, except in the single case of Bhutan, where the gross happiness index is the determinant of policy and not the GDP.
Right, I understand. Okay.
Yeah.
My last question to you is, I noticed the word trust there. And
yes,
how, if at all, is this linked to the concept of social capital?
it is linked to the concept of social capital in the following way. Social capital is the result of trust.
Right.
Let me illustrate with a very simple story. There's a friend of mine called Vishal Mangalwadi, who had done his PhD, had written books and things like that in India. So he'd done his master's degree and written books and things like that in India, was invited to give a lecture in the Netherlands. For the first time in his life, he was going to come out of India. He gets into Delhi airport, which is the closest airport to him for international flights in those days, sits down, finds himself next to a large Sardarji, and quite a loud Sardarji, and very friendly Sardarji. And Sardarji says to him, what is your name and where are you going? And so I'm going to London. Where are you going? Also London. And what do you do, says Sardarji? And my friend Vishal says, I write books. And Sardarji says, oh, this is books and things are a waste of time. Make money, get into business.
Yeah.
Vishal says, but look, I don't know anything about business. How can I get into business? Sardarji says, I didn't know anything about business. I got into business. I said, how can you get into business if you don't know business? He says, look, what you need is trust. I came here knowing nothing. I came up with a business idea. I talked to my friends. I got a little bit of money. I went to the bank and I said, look, bank, this is the idea, and so on and so forth. Bank said, yes, fine, here is the cash.
Yeah.
There is trust in the system. You don't have to do chaplacy. You don't have to do bribery. You don't have to do anything. If your idea seems good, then people out of trust will actually give you the cash.
Okay.
And you can begin to build your business. Now, Vishal didn't understand all this. He didn't understand what trust had to do with business success.
Yeah.
So he was tired, went to sleep. He got
Yeah.
up, he changed, which is what he had to do. He went to Netherlands. He got to there in the evening, was received by his host, went to sleep. In the morning, he gets up, of course, earlier than his host because he comes from India. And his host says, oh, you're up. Great. Breakfast is only at whatever time it was, 7 o'clock, I think. I normally go for a walk beforehand. Would you like to come for a walk with me? Yes, says Vishal.
Yeah.
So they go on a walk. At the end of the walk, they're coming back, and his host says, we need to pick up some milk for breakfast. Let's go and pick up some milk from this dairy.
Right.
They walk together to the dairy, and Vishal is absolutely astounded when the man picks up a bottle and opens the little box fridge-like thing, opens the thing, takes out the bottle, closes the fridge, goes to another box, and puts in the money
Yeah.
and walks off.
Yeah.
And Vishal is open-mouthed about this.
Yeah.
He says, "You mean you can just walk in and take as much milk as you want, and they depend on you to put in the cash?"
Yeah.
And his host says, "Of course. It's obvious."
Yeah. Yeah.
So Vishal goes back and thinks about this. And the penny begins to drop about trust.
Yeah.
He says, if the dairy owner did not trust the person to actually produce the cash when he takes the milk, he would have to install a system, either an electronic system or a human system,
Yes.
which would need to be paid for. As it needs to be paid for, obviously the cost to the customer will go up because it has to be recovered by the guy who's producing the system. Right? And if it is a human system, I can, of course, bribe the guy if I'm going there long enough and often enough and taking enough money. I can bribe the guy so that this chap still takes his salary from the other guy, but is actually allowing me to take stuff away.
Right.
Right? When the owner discovers that, he will have to put in somebody as an inspector to check that this chap isn't doing it.
Yeah.
So in a corrupt system, in a trust-lacking system, the cost spirals as its methods of inspection are put in place, one on top of the other.
Right.
The other side of it is that if I'm not an honest person as a customer, if I do not pay for the things that I take away, this increases the cost for the whole of the system.
Right.
So trust is a two-way activity. You need to expect trust from me, otherwise you will do this anyway, put in inspectors and inspection systems and all that, right, which will increase the cost. And if I don't behave in the way I should, meaning being honest and trustworthy and all that, I will create the necessity for these things to be produced.
Yes.
Very simple illustration, but I think it makes the point that honesty, transparency, trust are actually what lead to reduced cost of production, reduced cost of sale, and therefore increase real productive activity. The cost of an inspector does not add any value.
No, understood.
The cost of a super inspector does not add any real value.
No.
So trust is the basic thing which drives productivity, real productivity.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, Prabhu, I think we have talked enough. Thank you so much. And
very good to be
as I said, probably we'll be back with you 1 year later to see how it's going. In the meantime, let's say bye to our viewers. Bye-bye, everybody. I'll be back soon with another expert.
Thank you.
Until then, bye.